I was 22 when my family decided I was the easiest person to blame. Not the loudest. Not the weakest. Just the most convenient. I remember the moment clearly because my body reacted before my mind did. My hand started shaking around a chipped blue mug, my grandmother's favorite. Coffee spilled onto my wrist, burning my skin, but I didn't flinch. Pain felt safer than what was happening in that living room. "Ilara," my Uncle Marcus said gently, like he was doing me a favor. "We just need you to be honest." I was being honest. I had been honest for hours. The money, $480,000, had disappeared from my grandmother's trust account 2 weeks after her funeral. Everyone knew I had helped her with paperwork during her final months. I was studying accounting back then. I understood numbers, systems, access. Apparently, I also understood theft. My mother sat across from me on the couch, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't look angry. She looked resigned, like she had already chosen peace over truth. My younger brother Caleb leaned against the wall, scrolling on his phone as if this was happening to someone else. My Aunt Denise dabbed at dry eyes, performing heartbreak like she always did when attention was nearby. And then there was Richard. My stepfather didn't say a word. He just watched me. "You had access," Marcus continued. "You were under financial stress," Denise added softly. "You've always wanted independence," my mother finally said, her voice thin. "Maybe this was a mistake." "A mistake." I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. Short, cracked, almost hysterical. "You think I stole from Grandma?" I asked. No one answered. That silence pressed harder than any accusation. In that moment I understood something important. They didn't know I did it. They just needed someone who could have. The police were polite, professional, suspicious. My family didn't press charges directly. They didn't have to. They cooperated fully, statements, timelines, quiet suggestions. They gave investigators a story that made sense, wrapped neatly around my name. Within days my internship was terminated. The firm said it was temporary, but the partner couldn't meet my eyes. My bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Friends stopped replying. Invitations disappeared. Conversations ended awkwardly. It was like watching my life close its doors one by one. The case never went to trial. There wasn't enough evidence. But suspicion doesn't need proof to be destructive. It just needs repetition. The trust's insurance covered most of the loss. My family accepted the outcome gratefully, quietly, and then they moved on. Without me. My mother stopped calling. Caleb blocked me everywhere. On Thanksgiving I saw photos online. Everyone smiling around a table I wasn't invited to. Richard sat at the head, carving the turkey, completely at ease. That image stayed with me longer than the accusations. I left town 6 months later with 2 suitcases and a chest full of things I never said out loud. I rented a small room with peeling paint and a door that didn't close properly unless you lifted it just right. I worked nights at a bar, mornings at a grocery store, weekends cleaning offices no one noticed. Kept my head down. But I didn't forget. People think silence means surrender. That if you don't scream your innocence you must be guilty. What silence really does is give you time to listen. I replayed everything. Conversations, offhand comments. Who suggested what, and when? Who had access? Who benefited? One name kept resurfacing. Richard. He had always hovered around financial discussions. Always concerned. Always offering help that wasn't asked for. I remembered the night my grandmother's safe combination was changed, because Richard thought it was outdated. I remembered him driving her to the bank when I was busy. I remembered how quickly he suggested insurance when the money vanished. At the time I ignored my instincts. I wouldn't do that again. By 26, my life looked stable from the outside. New city. New job. I worked as a compliance analyst at a firm that investigated internal fraud. Quietly, methodically. I learned systems, loopholes, human behavior. I learned that people who steal rarely stop at once. And then one evening my phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't expected. Richard Vaughn accepted your LinkedIn connection request. I stared at the screen for a long time. To him I was still the girl who spilled coffee and broke under pressure. The one everyone else was willing to forget. I closed the app without responding. Some connections don't deserve immediate answers. Because while they were busy erasing me from their lives, I had been learning how people hide the truth. and why it always leaks out eventually. I hadn't lost my life. I had only lost my place in their version of it. And that made me dangerous. I didn't respond to Richard's request that night. I let it sit there, his name glowing softly on my screen, while I brushed my teeth, folded laundry, and lay awake listening to the radiator hiss like it knew something I didn't. I wanted to understand why now. People like Richard don't reconnect out of nostalgia. They reconnect when they need control. 3 days later I accepted. Within minutes, a message arrived. Lara. Wow. It's been a long time. Hope you're doing well. No apology. No awkward acknowledgement of the past. Just confidence. That told me everything. I replied politely, neutral, the kind of tone you use when you don't want someone to know where you're standing. He asked about my work. I gave him nothing specific. He told me about his consulting investments, helping companies stay compliant. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Over the next few weeks he started engaging with my post. Liking articles I shared about internal audits, financial transparency, regulatory blind spots. He thought he was flattering me. What he was really doing was showing interest in the very thing that could destroy him. I didn't rush. Rushing is what innocent people do when they want to be believed. I started pulling threads. Not illegally. Not recklessly. Just carefully enough that no one noticed what I was really looking for. Richard had moved money before. Small amounts spread across accounts disguised as consulting fees and reimbursements. It wasn't enough to flag alarms on its own. But patterns don't lie. They wait. One late night I found something interesting. A shell company registered 2 years before my grandmother died. The timing bothered me. So did the address. A virtual office 2 blocks from Richard's gym. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This wasn't proof. But it was a fingerprint. I didn't confront him. I didn't even hint. Instead I let him talk. Richard loved to talk when he thought he was mentoring someone. He told me about mistakes young people make, about loyalty, about family. He framed himself as someone who had survived betrayal without bitterness. The irony tasted sharp. Then one evening casually he mentioned my mother. She misses you, he typed. She just doesn't know how to fix things. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. He was testing the waters. So I responded the way he expected, carefully emotional, slightly unsure. I miss her too. I just don't think there's room for me. His reply came quickly. Families make mistakes. Sometimes they just need time. Time. I smiled. Because time was the one thing I had learned how to use better than anyone. Over the next month I made myself useful. I shared insights. Recommended articles. Gave advice framed as curiosity. I let him believe I admired his experience. I let him think he was shaping me. That's when he made his mistake. He invited me to consult, informally, on a project. A small thing. Just looking over some financial workflows for a company he was advising. No contracts. No paper trail. I agreed. The files he sent were clean on the surface. Too clean. Numbers aligned perfectly as if they'd been rehearsed. But perfection leaves marks too. Buried in the metadata was a name I recognized. The shell company. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I had learned how not to react. Instead I documented everything. Quietly, methodically. Dates. Versions. Correspondence. I let the pattern form completely before touching it. Then something unexpected happened. My brother Caleb emailed me. No subject line. Just a sentence. Mom isn't doing well. He keeps asking about you. I almost deleted it. Almost. I asked for details. He replied hours later, vague, non-committal. The same way people talk when they want sympathy but not responsibility. That's when I realized something else. Richard wasn't just nervous. He was tightening his grip. A week later he called me for the first time. Ilara, he said warmly. It's really good to hear your voice. I let a pause hang between us. You too, I said. He talked about reconciliation. About family dinners. About how things got complicated back then. He never said my name alongside the word money. He didn't have to. Near the end of the call he said casually, I might need your help with something bigger soon. Officially. There it was. I agreed again. Not because I trusted him. But because I wanted him comfortable. After the call I sat very still. I thought about my grandmother's hands, how they trembled near the end. about the way she had once squeezed mine and said, "Pay attention to who listens when you speak." Richard had always listened. That wasn't kindness. That was strategy. I began preparing contingencies. Legal. Professional. Personal. I made sure nothing I touched could be traced back to emotion. Only process. I wasn't trying to expose him yet. I was letting him build the stage. And he did. 2 months later he invited me to visit. "Just dinner," he said. "Your mother would love to see you." I looked at the calendar. Then at the file on my desktop, now thick with quiet truths. "Yes," I said softly. "I think it's time." When the call ended I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. Because I finally understood what they never did. They thought I came back to belong again. They didn't realize I had already stepped outside the story they wrote for me. And once you see the structure clearly enough, you can decide exactly where it breaks. Dinner was at a quiet, upscale restaurant in the city. Richard had reserved a private room. Soft lighting, polished wood, the kind of place that screams controlled power without saying a word. My mother was already there, smiling nervously, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her scarf. Caleb hovered near the doorway, pretending casual interest while clearly uncomfortable. I walked in slowly, letting them see me, fully, not the trembling girl who had spilled coffee years ago, not the one they had discarded. I was calm, collected, and aware of every glance. "Ilara," my mother exclaimed a little too loudly. "You look amazing." I smiled. It was polite, warm, but distant. That warmth would draw them in, the distance would keep them off balance. Richard greeted me last, extending his hand in a formal, controlled gesture. "I've missed this," he said in that same tone he had always used, soft, practiced, confident. I nodded and we all sat. Conversation began lightly, about work, about mutual acquaintances, about nothing significant. They thought this was the reunion they wanted. I had already planted the seeds. Weeks of careful observation had taught me more about them than they knew about themselves. I knew where their weaknesses were, who could be manipulated, what buttons to press. Dinner progressed. Richard excused himself briefly to take a call, leaving the documents he had sent me months ago on the table. I casually spread them out, referencing them as if I were reviewing numbers. Caleb peered over my shoulder. "You always liked spreadsheets," he said, an edge of sarcasm in his voice. "Yes," I said softly. "I liked noticing patterns people overlook." My mother frowned slightly, sensing something, but not exactly what. I opened one of the files, pointing out a discrepancy. Just one. Minor, almost insignificant to anyone else, but significant enough that it would trigger a thought in Richard. "Oh, that's probably a clerical error," he said, sounding slightly uneasy. I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting," I said. "Because this account shows consistent withdrawals coinciding with transfers to another company. The same company you mentioned as consulting last month." Richard froze slightly. Not panic, not yet. Just subtle tension. I smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but carries a warning. "What do you mean?" my mother asked innocently. "I mean," I said, leaning slightly forward, "that all these little consulting payments add up over time. Enough to notice if you pay attention." Richard's hand twitched and he quickly covered it with a napkin. My mother looked confused, Caleb slightly uneasy, and I kept my calm. Because now they were listening. I reached into my bag casually and pulled out a folder. A neat stack of printouts. I set it on the table in front of Richard. "All documented," I said simply. "Dates, amounts, metadata, correspondence. You'll notice it's consistent with every minor error we've discussed in the past. It's easy to trace when you know what to look for." Richard tried to smile, but it was tight. "Ilara. I didn't come here for reconciliation," I said. "I came here to finish what should have been finished years ago." I watched the room shrink around them, the realization hitting my mother first. She knew, even before Caleb or Richard, that this wasn't about conversation or forgiveness. This was about exposure. Caleb stammered. "Wait, you have proof?" I nodded. "Not just proof. Patterns. Timelines. Everything. Enough for authorities to investigate. Enough to make certain people uncomfortable." Richard leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You planned all this?" "I observed," I corrected him. "I learned. I waited. And now, the patterns make themselves visible without me touching them further." My mother finally understood. She looked away, guilt written on her face, shame she couldn't disguise. Richard's voice lowered. You could have asked for reconciliation, Alara. We could have. You could have told the truth when it mattered, I interrupted softly. You didn't. You all chose convenience over me. Over honesty. Over justice. That decision created me. The me sitting here who doesn't flinch, who notices everything, who keeps records. That me is dangerous because I understand the system better than anyone in this room. Silence filled the space. I stood, gathered my documents and placed them in my bag. I don't need apologies. I don't need pity. I just need you to understand. What you buried with lies will eventually surface, and I've made sure of that. Richard swallowed, but no words came out. Caleb looked pale, my mother's lips trembled. I paused at the door. You thought I was weak. You thought silence meant defeat. But silence is where you watch, where you learn, where you wait. And waiting gives you power. Then I walked out. Not angrily. Not triumphantly, calmly. By the time they processed it, I was already outside, breathing in the cold night air, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. A week later, the investigation quietly began. Nothing dramatic, no arrests, no shouting headlines, but slowly, systematically, the inconsistencies I had documented started surfacing in Richard's business dealings. Authorities asked questions. Partners noticed irregularities. The shell company came under scrutiny. My mother tried to intervene quietly, pleading behind closed doors. Caleb called, hoping for mediation. I listened politely without giving anything away. They all realized one by one that the game had changed. I wasn't the one to sacrifice anymore. I wasn't the weak link. By the time Richard understood that the legal net was tightening, it was too late. His carefully constructed facade of innocence and control was unraveling. Friends who had trusted him professionally stepped back, questioning decisions they had once defended. Colleagues became distant. Business deals paused. Reputation faltered. He never suspected me. Not fully. Because I had never acted rashly. I had observed. I had documented. I had let him continue believing he was safe until the system itself became the instrument of his unraveling. And my mother? She learned too. The guilt, the fear of what could have been avoided, it sank into her slowly like a stone in water, impossible to ignore. Caleb? He learned what it felt like to watch someone quietly rise above the chaos they had helped create, to see consequences arrive without malice, just inevitability. And me? I finally stepped back completely. No threats, no dramatic confrontations. Just truth patiently applied until it was unstoppable. I had won. Not with anger. Not with force. Not even with revenge in the traditional sense. I had won by being patient, by being prepared, by letting the very system they trusted, the one they used to discard me, be the instrument of justice. As I closed the file one last time, I realized the most satisfying part of all was that I hadn't lost myself along the way. I was still Alara, calm, observant, and unstoppable. And now, no one in that family could look at me and think they could ever control me again. Weeks passed, but the tension in my family never eased. Not because I lingered in their lives. They barely saw me, but because the ripple of truth I had set in motion kept spreading. Richard's office emails became cautious. Board members asked questions he couldn't answer smoothly. The shell company was audited. His consulting deals stalled. A few minor partners quietly withdrew. No one made accusations publicly, but the atmosphere shifted. Whispers followed him wherever he went. My mother called one afternoon. Her voice trembled, not with anger, but exhaustion. Alara, she began, hesitating. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied calmly. You acted according to what you thought was convenient. That's on you, not me. She sighed long and heavy. I should have trusted you. I should have seen things clearly. I let him manipulate everything. You didn't just let him manipulate things, I said softly, my voice steady. You let yourselves manipulate me. That's the part you need to understand. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. I needed clarity. And clarity comes when actions have consequences. She was silent after that. She knew I was right. Caleb sent a text later that day. I understand now. I was blind. Sorry for doubting you. I didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. He would understand fully soon enough. Richard tried to contact me one last time, claiming he wanted to make amends. His confidence had crumbled, and beneath the veneer, desperation showed. I answered calmly. "I don't need amends," I said. "You needed accountability and the system provided it. I didn't do anything extraordinary, just watched and documented. You underestimated the quiet ones. You underestimated me." He stammered. "Elara, please." "No," I said. "I hope you understand one day why silence is dangerous for people like you. That's all." I hung up. For the first time in years I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Not from triumph over them, but from being free of their version of my life. The anger, the betrayal, the fear, it had all transformed into knowledge, experience, and calm strength. I returned to my apartment, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to smile without restraint. My career thrived quietly, steadily. I had earned a reputation as someone meticulous, reliable, and thorough. Colleagues sought me for insight not because of who I was related to, but because of what I knew and how I applied it. I traveled when I wanted, stayed when I wanted. I invested in projects that interested me, not projects that would appease anyone else. My personal life flourished cautiously, surrounded by people who had earned my trust, not inherited it. Then one evening I walked past the old city park, the place my grandmother loved. I paused by the fountain, listening to the water trickle, letting memories float around me. She had always told me to notice everything, to keep attention on the small details. That advice had saved me, though I hadn't understood it fully until now. I thought about Richard, about my mother, about Caleb, about every slight, every accusation, every stolen opportunity. And I understood something fully finally. The real power didn't come from revenge, proof, or exposure. It came from surviving their betrayal intact, growing stronger, and living on my own terms. That night I allowed myself to feel closure. Not hatred, not sadness, just calm understanding. I had been wronged. They had acted selfishly, cruelly, and cowardly. But the wrong done to me had not destroyed me. It had refined me. I left the park, the city lights reflecting in puddles from an earlier rain. Each step felt lighter than the last. I was no longer the girl they discarded. I was no longer the target. I was the observer, the strategist, and now the one fully in control of my life. Weeks later, I heard through mutual contacts that Richard had resigned from most of his consulting boards. His reputation, quietly but inexorably, was in shambles. My mother quietly withdrew from the family business decisions. Caleb focused on his career, humbled and careful, no longer speaking out of turn. And I continued quietly, my life moving forward in a rhythm they could never touch again. The most satisfying part wasn't seeing them falter. It was knowing I had done it without losing myself. Without lowering myself to threats or cruelty. I had simply been patient, attentive, and consistent. For years they had underestimated me, assuming I would break, speak out, or beg for acceptance. They didn't realize I had been rewriting my future in silence. And now, watching from a distance, they had no power over me whatsoever. I realized that life, sometimes, doesn't require confrontation or shouting. It requires patience. Observation, knowledge, the courage to keep moving when others expect you to stumble, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the truth will always catch up to the liars. I walked home that night, the city quiet around me, and felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. I was free, fully, and in that freedom I smiled. Not out of victory, not out of malice, but out of complete clarity. I had survived their betrayal. I had mastered my life, and no one, not even my family, could ever take that away from me. If you've ever been underestimated or betrayed, remember, stay patient, stay observant, and don't let anyone write your story for you. Subscribe and comment your own story of standing up for yourself.